What's going on, my creative collective? Welcome to lesson number 24 for A Course in Creativity, Fishing Trips with the God Trick. And this is based on lesson 24 from A Course in Miracles, the workbook. There's some thunder here, and there's a bit of a thunderstorm happening outside. Some ambiance, right? Some setting the mood with the thunderstorm happening and the pattering of the rain on the window. But we're going to dive in still. So, what are our best interests, right? We think of them, are they preferences? Are they wants? Are they desires? What are they really? What are they? You know, when I think about preferences, it's being locked into this ego certainty, right? This ego certainty. My own best interests generally refer to control based on certainty, right? Control based on certainty. What does that mean? Well, it means that in order to, there are certain rules that we make about the world around us, and our wants and preferences and needs, and we formulate them into this equation of best interest, because what we're trying to do is reassert these rules that we've created that help our world make sense. Now, I'm not talking about the rules of physics and things like that. I'm talking about the ways that we attach ourselves to desires or wants, and how we need to step outside of the idea of the outcome that we want, right? Because sometimes we put, even on a vision board, right? You can put all that you want on a vision board, but what if something comes along that's way better, that's different, but we lock ourselves into this sense of certainty, so we just anchor into it instead of stepping outside of it and allowing ourselves the joy of knowing what it means to let life surprise and delight us. And this isn't just true of, things that we want and desired outcomes, but this is also true of the expectations that we can place on others, right? Now, before we go too far into this, what is the God trick? The God trick is a term that was coined by Donna Haraway in her essay about situated knowledges. This is, I think, from 1988. And in it, she talks basically about how scientists act in a sort of, these disembodied scientists create universal truths about the world and make it seem as though they're not in it, as they create these rules from a disembodied place, but yet they're so deeply embedded in the world even still. Perhaps not in the historical sense, not from a place of historicity, but they're still in it, right? They're still embedded there. So it's sort of the way the ego operates, right? It suggests things as a truth for us, not just a truth, but things that we should want, or outcomes or expectations that we need to have, because it's just the right thing to do, because it's the right connection, it's the right, it's just the right. We get locked into this place, though, where we start to believe it. We start to believe more in that the world that the ego is making through those expectations, through those desired outcomes, instead of the ones that might be available to us otherwise. So the God trick and the fishing trip here is that the God trick is really the trick of the ego, right? If you're looking for the God trick of the ego, it is certainty. It is certainty, because in certainty, we're anchored in a right and wrong. We're anchored in a binary. Now, my research for my master's thesis was a lot about community development at the interstices, or at the intersection of policy and different things along the lines of white supremacy culture. Now, people might be like, "Ooh, that sounds low vibe." It really isn't, though. So I'll put a link in the description below to it. There's a lot of antidotes in it that are great inward focusing points of reflection to understand how our own spiritual practices are aligned with a world that is truly equitable, and not just equity seeking, but grounded in these spiritual principles. So that's just an aside, but this God trick and certainty, it gets into this binary thinking, which is in white supremacy culture, and the antidote for it is operating outside from a place of both and, right? So what does both and mean in the context of this certainty, this need to be right? The Course in Miracles lesson is, I do not perceive my own best interests. So best interests is not preferences. It's not things that are not going to harm us or going to harm us. It's not on that spectrum. This is referring to the ways that we construct the world and ourselves through our behaviors around it, right? So it sort of acts like a fulcrum around which our wheels turn in our lives about desire, about what we think we should do or think we should want, Certainty is kind of like the ego's God trick, right? To produce truths about the world that seem like they're not anchored in it, but they're certainly of it and within it, without question. And some of the power of this God trick in scientific literatures or in different scientific, realms or spectrums in terms of creating rules about the world. Is generated from the expertise that they hold. So the expertise that they hold then creates a whole body of knowledge, and it creates a way of structuring that. So for example, from white supremacy culture, the antidote is looking at knowledge and how it's constructed in ways of knowing. In Canada, this is particularly important for us related to Indigenous cultures, right? Different ways of knowing have been often pushed to the sidelines because it's just different from what has become the mainstream. So it's really about understanding the ways that our ego also replicates this kind of process to create expertise through repetitive experiences. So past history, right? When we look at, I don't know what something means. So this is really looking at that past history and the repetition of it. It's past patterns too, right? Dr. Shefali Sabari, in her book A Radical Awakening, talked about how you don't live a life, you live a pattern. And that is so true for so many people. I'll say it again because it was such brilliant wisdom when I read it last summer. You don't live a life, you live a pattern. And I think that the ego relies on these patterns to anchor in truths about the world, people in it, what we should want, what our desires mean, who we are in light of our desires, who we are in light of how all of that comes together with others, right? So it's quite a profound teaching. I may not even edit that out. I love thunderstorms. One of the ways that we can get around this is asking what keeps us in curiosity. What keeps us curious? What keeps us in a state of asking questions more than having deep knowings, right? Because your knowing is different from certainty, isn't it? You're knowing about peace. You're knowing about things always being okay in some way. You always have what it takes to get through. That's a knowing. Certainty is slightly different, right? So what is knowing versus certainty, and how do these work together? I find that staying curious is one of the surest ways to stay close to knowing. It's a way to stay close to knowing, right? Because knowing gives off as a kind of sunlight. Knowing gives off a kind of sunlight. Certainty is the harsh teacher that slaps a ruler on the desk to get attention, right? That's the difference. The energetics of it are very different. Certainty is anchored in a harshness, but knowing is it flows, it moves, it's intuitive. It reminds me so much of water. I've been doing so much meditating with water lately, but welcome to the pool. That's really what this channel has become. But nonetheless, certainty is also about being right more than it is about being true. What does this mean? Well, being true is the authenticity of something, and it's not the insistence that it be anything else, that it mean anything else. Being right, it requires answers. It requires a certainty. And life is anything but certain. If you had told me 15 years ago that I would finally be able to come out and transition and come out as someone who wanted to transition, I would have laughed and I would have asked how you saw my journals, right? But things change all the time. And the more that we anchor in something, the more that we're in certainty. And we're really trapped in that moment too, because when we're in certainty, we also demand that the world align with what we need and want. We demand something of the world that sometimes it just can't give us, and that it's not here to give. And that also brings us to the next point of that's really what the ego requires to survive, is looking to things that are not meant to fill the holes that it lives in inside your heart, right? For example, with grad school, I went to grad school and I thought, well, this is my chance to get a degree and I either do it or I do it, right? There were so many things, there were so many pressures riding on that because I was the first one in my immediate family to get a degree. I was also the first one in my mother's side of the family to get a degree, period, let alone a graduate degree. So there was so many stories. I really had to stay in the place of knowing why I wanted it and why I was doing the research I was doing, and to stay in that place of true. What is true? True is flexible, right? True is air. It exists regardless. So what's true about it? What's real about it? But the stories would have me believe that the degree is going to do something for my identity that it just can't do. It does not have the capacity because it's just a degree. It's just a degree, right? in the end, it doesn't mean much. I mean, it does to some people, but it doesn't add to my person. So in a way, we can look to the world outside of us to do similar things when we're in certainty. Because it's almost, the other way to think about it too, it's almost like an insatiable appetite. An insatiable appetite. Certainty has to be fed. It has to be fed with something constantly. Whereas true, it doesn't. It really just doesn't. It allows you to just be with something. And we can think about this in terms of relationships and people too. When we get into relationships with people or friendships, sometimes we expect them, right? We are certain about specific things. This is where our best interests, they're very closely aligned, these best interests and certainty. And we can expect that relationships or people will start to fill needs that they just can't. They just cannot do, and that they would never be able to do. And that's where we place all of these unfair expectations on others and also ourselves. When we hold the mirror up to ourselves at the end of the day, we also recognize that we get into this place of certainty too with us. And we expect things of ourselves and situations in relationship to us that just can't provide that. So when we say we can't perceive our own best interests, it's not that we can't perceive what we want. It's that we don't necessarily view the whole self. We don't view our higher self as part of the equation of what it is that we want all the time. And I think it's also about allowing yourself to be delighted and surprised by what life brings you. Because there are so many times where I did not expect specific things to come, and they did, and it was wonderful. But if I had stayed in certainty, and if I had stayed in that anchored place of it must look this way, because of my ego, I would have missed it. I would have missed it entirely. Lesson 24. I do not perceive my own best interests. For A Course in Miracles from the workbook, and for A Course in Creativity, this is Fishing Trips with the God Trick. I appreciate your patience with the thunderstorm and the lighting in the background. It is all about my granny's place right now, so that's where I am. I'm having a great time. I'm seeing my family. I appreciate your patience with the videos for the next couple of them, but I still wanted to get the content to you because it matters more that it's here than that it shows up perfect. So on that note, my friends, wherever this video finds you on the time-space continuum, morning, afternoon, or night, I hope it finds you very, very well. Take care, my lovelies.